Uh, Great. So, building momentum with thematic goals. So, this is a conversation about vision and visionary leadership. So, as we begin, I want to talk about like what's the problem we're solving. So, so why does vision fall flat? So in our churches, when we cast vision, we're usually talking about some big goal or dream for the future, trying to help people see where God is taking us together. But most attempts at vision provide an incomplete picture of where God is taking us. And if we've done vision work before, you may have heard me talk about thinking wavelength, where like there's high thinking wavelength, which is abstract and theoretical, and there's low thinking wavelength, which is on the ground and tactical. And usually we can tend toward one or the other direction. That's how we end up providing that incomplete picture because we're giving just the inspirational content or just the operational content. And but particularly, I think when we think about vision, we think most often about um, it's all dream and no plan, or it's lots of plans with no progress. So like in the terms of thinking wavelength, that all dream and no plan is the big, hairy, audacious goal that sounds really great, but nobody knows how it's going to get done. And then all plans with no progress is like we throw out lots of things we're going to do, lots of strategies, lots of ideas, and we can get really tactical about it, but it actually becomes overwhelming. We don't make any progress. And so the question becomes, how do we overcome this sort of vision falling flat thing? Um, we need a way to chart a course to mark our progress. We need a way to chart a course and to mark our progress. So if we've got that big dream, we need to be able to talk about how we're going to progress toward it. And if we're feeling overwhelmed by all the things, we need to be able to mark our progress. So again, I'm coming at this from a big strategic point of view. And so if you're leading, like if you're in Tim's seat and you're a lead pastor, that might be helpful. Also, though, I know we have folks on the call who lead departments. And so like even in your department, so like if you're a youth director, it's the same kind of thing. Like what are we for our students and parents, what are we actually trying to accomplish? And we could have a big dream about what we're hoping for our youth department, but if we don't have a plan, or if we just have lots of programs and there's no sense of progress, vision will fall flat. Um, so this is where we get to what I call thematic goals. Well, actually, probably a lot of people call them thematic goals. That's not my term. I didn't make it up. Um, but we to understand what we're talking about with thematic goals. So big vision with no plan or lots of plans with no sense of progress. How do we overcome those things? When I do this training with teams, we tell a story from World War II where there was a general named General Rommel. He was the bad guy, a bad guy on the bad guy team for Germany. And originally I had his photo here, and I was like, let's not, you know what? Let's just put a tank there. Because his job was to get the tanks across the desert. And so what he found was like when you're driving a tank in the desert, it's all just sun and sand, and you're in this big machine that's so loud you can't even hear yourself think with a little tiny viewfinder and you have no context. You can start to lose your sense of progress. And so what General Rommel did was he would tell a Jeep to drive up ahead with a 55-gallon drum with a big orange flag in it and set those along the course, along the path that the tanks had to travel. And he made sure that no matter where they were, the tank driver could see the next flag up ahead. What he found was when he did this, the tanks moved through the desert faster. So a lesson we can learn here is like the longest journeys require the clearest guideposts. Um, like, and this is what I've begun to find in my own pastoral leadership in the church that I lead, is like people can get excited or compelled about a big dream, but if we don't talk about it consistently, they A, forget about it, and B, even if we bring it up every 6 or 12 months, if it's a 5 or 10 year vision, we're not getting any closer in that 6 or 9 month period. So there's no way to feel that progress. So we need those 55-gallon drums with orange flags in them to help us know that we're headed in the right direction and to help us feel the sense of progress. I want to pause there. Any thoughts or questions so far? Stuff you like best? Anybody on the call? Anything lacking clarity, or you good?
The story itself is compelling, and you can see exactly where you're going
Yeah. Yeah.
using that example.
Yeah. That's great. Anybody else? Reflections, questions, things you like best?
The importance of consistency that you gotta keep putting. If you miss a week, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you've really lost a month.
Yeah. 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 Because of the infrequent worship attendance. Yes. Yeah. 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 Cool. All right. So that's the power of focus. So how do we actually use this in our planning and our leadership? So what's a thematic goal? A thematic goal keeps everyone on the same page and helps track progress toward the longer term dream. A thematic goal is the big rallying cry for your whole organization. So, again, we can have a big dream for where we're headed overall, but right now, what's the one thing I'm reminding people to do or get involved with or be a part of? And what's the one thing we're all trying to rally around right now? That may not be the thing we're ultimately after, but it's a step along the way that we can get everybody rallied around. Okay. So when we can have one rallying cry that's a smaller goal on the way to the longer dream, it can help us build urgency and connectedness with where we are right now. Um, So a good thematic goal completes your visionary picture by connecting the magical and the mundane. So here's what I mean by that. Again, if you've worked with me before, you're probably familiar with this little sketch, which is it's a napkin sketch version of what we mean by vision. And so if this is a complete picture of our future, in the way we talk about it in the vision planning process that I use, there's four components here. There's the sky in the background, which is that big long-term dream out in the distance. It's the beyond the horizon vision. There's the mountaintops right here that are sort of like the big operational rocks we're after. In our system, these are 3 year goals. So 4 goals on a 3 year horizon. So that's the long range vision. One big dream that's like 5 to 10 years out and 4 objectives or tasks to complete on a 3 year horizon. All the way down here at the bottom is this road sign, which represents the stuff we're doing day to day right now. And that can get a little mundane. And again, like we can get lost in every year or 3 years, we're setting big goals that take a long time to accomplish. And in between, we're just managing the day to day and putting out fires. But there's another piece in here, and this is what I mean by a complete picture. Because if I took this picture and blocked out the bottom half, you'd say that's incomplete. If I took this picture and blocked out the top half and just showed you the road and the sign, you'd say that's incomplete. Very often, if we just have this long range dream and these day-to-day things down here at the bottom, we're blocking out the road ahead. And so that's where your thematic goal fits. And so that thematic goal, which is a singular focus in the near term, 6, 9, 12, 18-month period. I like to stick with a year. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But that one goal on a near-term horizon is the bridge between what we're doing day to day and where we're going in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And so, like, just before we started recording, like, I'll use Vicky's example. She's like, I've got lots of ideas in my head. It's really hard for me to get everybody on the same page about where we're going. And then, we can make jokes about, yeah, all the voices in my head, which gets distracted, right? But what this does is go, okay, you know what? We don't have to communicate everything. We don't have to keep people focused on all the big dreams. We just have to pick one thing that we're going to rally people around, believing and trusting that if we can do one thing and then one thing again and then one thing again, it's going to help move us in the direction that we're ultimately going. So a thematic goal. And again, some of the underpinnings here that I'm assuming you have is like basic goal setting, like creating specific and actionable goals, things we can measure, all of that kind of thing. And we can get more into that later if you have questions. But essentially, we're going, what's one goal that connects people to the long range vision and gives them something to do in the near term that keeps them connected to where we're going together? Any questions or thoughts about kind of defining the thematic goal there? Great, great. Okay, so how do we do this? What does it look like? Um, so I'm sort of trying to simplify and summarize. Again, a couple of you have worked with me before, so you know I have like 5 handouts that I for this that we could fill in, and there's blanks and all of that. But essentially, it's like this. In order to use that thematic goal to build momentum, you're going to need to be anchored in a long range dream. So, like, just setting goals for the sake of goals isn't really going to get us where we want to go or where God is taking us. But there is a necessary step of anchoring in a long range dream about what God is doing for our church or our ministry. Then, what we need to be able to do is take that long range dream and chunk it down. So, meaning so I'm saying identify key time breaks. A question I'm often asking church leaders is, when does your programming year begin and end? And so, like, when are the natural points in your year when people are paying a little more attention? Like, like, usually, like, my dad was a pastor. He used to always say the lowest church attendance was between Easter and Christmas. So, from Christmas to Easter, you've got your highest attendance. So, that means in those people's minds, whether they're aware of it or not, there's a point a little bit before Christmas where they start tuning back into church. And so if we can identify, now this is different for some churches. Some churches do like a rally day around the beginning of school. Some people are really adhere to the church calendar beginning in Advent, right? Some people it really begins like it's the calendar year that really guides them and they kick off new things in January or February. So for your church and in your context, where are the key time breaks? Um, so that allows you um, to go, okay, this goal is going to fit a certain span of time. And so once I've clarified what that span of time is, now I can go, all right, what's my focus for that span of time? And here's like what I find the most critical thing that people miss, the facilitation that can help with is don't jump right to setting a goal. First, identify what you want to focus on without it being a goal. We want to focus on building more relational connections in the church. We want to focus on getting people serving their neighbor. We want to focus on the discipline of prayer. There's some focus or emphasis. We decide that first. And so, okay, over the next 6, 9, 12 months, we're going to focus on this. Once we've determined that, then we turn that into a goal. And it's really helpful to remember the focus even after you've written the goal. Because what I find is you get 3 or 6 months into hyping the goal, and you'll find that you start to worry about whether or not the goal is going to get met. You just have to evaluate on whether or not you're actually getting people to focus on the thing you wanted to focus on. Because remember, what we're trying to do here is anchor people in the longer range vision and feel the momentum of of making progress toward it. So that focus is the key thing. That was a lot of information. Any thoughts or questions there?
Jacob, can you give us an example quickly about a near-term focus and then a
Yep.
goal for that?
Yep. So one of the favorite ones in the church that I lead was we wanted people to really sort of like um, practice hospitality and begin to invite their neighbors into the culture that God was building in our church. And so we wanted to get them thinking more outward in terms of community formation and development. And so we set a goal of 100 parties. At the time, we were probably worshiping 40 to 60 people on a Sunday, including kids. And so we said, over the coming year, we want to collectively among our whole church throw 100 parties. And then what we had people do was when they had a party, they would snap a selfie and then send that picture to us, and we would print it and hang it in the back of our worship space. Like we had these frames with the clips. And so, and we said a party is three households coming together. Like there has to be three households represented for it to be a party, just doing something together. And then like if I was really explaining it a lot, I would say and try to make sure one of those three, like it's here's your household you're hosting. Make sure at least one of those other households is somebody who's not a part of our church. Um, and then what we did was we resourced around that for the year. So we bought like there's this little tiny book called Happy Hour by Hugh Halter. It's like Advice for Holy Merriment is what is the subtitle. So we bought a bunch of copies of that book and gave them out. We got like custom stadium cups with like the 100 Parties logo on them and gave and like here's supplies to throw a party with. And then we like kind of just taught on hospitality that year, but kept tracking toward that 100 Parties goal. Um, as luck would have it, that was the 1920 count, like the 1920 programming year, so it got disrupted by COVID. But it's one people still remember, even though we didn't get to finish the year on it. Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions on this part?
What was the name of that book again?
That one is called Happy Hour. Uh, something and advice for holy merriment. And it's like when we bought them, he was selling them in packs of five for $35, like so that the idea being don't read it alone, you know? And it covers things as simple as like it's like make sure everybody has a drink in their hand. Like, that like that's simple and basic. But he's a Christian missional guy, the author.
When you say that about the drink in your hand, I did some research on what happens when somebody has a warm cup of coffee and their perception of whatever environment they're in just by having something warm in your hand increases a positive perception regardless of what your environment really truly is.
Huh.
So we've moved a coffee station right to the front of our door and
Yeah.
we encourage people right away to get coffee. I was amazed at the psychology of it,
Yes.
and how impactful just that is.
Yes. And see, that's the kind of thing where it's like for example, moving the coffee station to the front and encourage people to grab a cup of coffee. That's an example of like you might and this might not be a thematic goal for the whole church, but it might be a way of thinking about goal setting in your congregation. It's like, oh, we want people to feel more at home on Sunday morning. Great, let's track the number of cups of coffee we give out. Not because giving away coffee is the goal, but because we know that if people have a cup of coffee, they're going to feel more welcome. So we're going to track because we can count cups of coffee. It's harder to count welcome. Yeah. All right. So again, I use the word momentum in the title of this webinar, so we have to talk about that. What I've found is I've been using this system for like almost 10 years. And so it's like in the church that I lead. I've been helping other churches use these tools since 2017. And those of you who try to lead with vision know uh, developing that rhythm can be tough. So not all of them have kept up with setting and resetting 1 year goals. Um, but here's kind of how I think of it is like, so let's say that you've never had a rallying focus for your congregation. In the first year, you're gonna have to continue to orient people to a new system. So like you're gonna have to, hey, remember we have a theme this year. Remember we have a theme this year. Remember we have a theme this year. And and you're gonna be educating them. And then in year two, you're helping people lean into a new way. Because now it's like, okay, we're gonna do that again. I'm like, oh, really? I mean, I don't know. That was like felt like a lot, right? Or like felt like you had to harp on it, or but you're helping them lean into like, okay, we track on something together. Every year we do something together. Um, and this was like that year that we did 100 parties in 1920. When we came back from COVID, some other people were like, let's do that again. And I was pretty adamant, like, no, we're not going to do the same thing again because we're a different church than we were then. Like, there's a different thing that we need to focus on now than we did then. And so keeping up with that, like each year, or if you're finding that, so for us, really, what happens is like usually that goal starts in like we communicated in November, we started in earnest in January, and it wraps up like by September, October, you know? Um, we're using that to mark the year. You might decide that like you actually just go with the school year and take the summer off or something, right? But so each year you're setting this new goal. You're orienting people to a new system. You're leaning into a new way. Then in year three, you're starting to build on success. So the idea is like if you are communicating and celebrating this goal regularly, it's going to feel like a thing we do, and you can start to stack the story of accomplishing these goals together, or at least making progress together. Um, for me, I'm a goal setter in my life and in my leadership. I rarely hit the goals that I set, but I always feel like I'm making progress. You might be different than me. You might want to always hit the goal. That's part of calibrating your own life and leadership. But so when I say building on success, that doesn't necessarily have to mean always hitting every numerical goal, but it is beginning to sense the progress as an organization. And then in like I think by year four and beyond, it becomes a rhythm. So now, like in our congregation, people just kind of it's a part of the rhythm of our life together that each year we're communicating with them, here's what we're focusing on this year. And they can remember the wins from the previous year. And that's where like actually for me as a leader, we've had to really lean into making sure we establish a feedback loop because it's so embedded now that people are feeling the progress and they're aligned, but I'm not aware until I ask. And so like there was a couple of years ago, I was like, is this year's goal even making a difference? And somebody's like, yeah, I heard 3 stories from people about how their life has changed by the way we've been communicating this year. And so you can start to see people just kind of ease into this rhythm of focusing on one thing together. Um, how does that strike you? Again, like I know at Trinity and at Epiphany, we've done a little planning. I know at very different times. Uh, um, how does this strike any of you in terms of your own leadership? What do you like, or what feels tough?
For I guess for me, like my mind goes to kind of the story you were painting about, hey, we're like the orienting year is like, hey, this is what we're doing, constantly reminding them. And then like year two coming and them being surprised that we're continuing to do the same thing was kind of the picture you're painting, which I can understand, but it makes me wonder, like, for the people that are involved, do we loop them in on this sort of strategy, this 4-year plan, so that they're at least aware, hey, this is not going to be a 1 year long thing. We're really shooting for 4 or 5, even 10 years down the road. This is the strategy that we're implementing.
Yes. And again, that's where I think like it's crucial to have a long range vision where like this thematic goal is not the end in mind. It's simply a rhythm for walking together toward the bigger dream we've already clarified. And so
Right.
ideally, yeah, what would happen is you've got a visionary plan that that you've got your leadership team aligned on and oriented toward. And even your people are aware of these longer range goals and dreams. And then, yes, really what I'm advocating for next month, we'll talk about how to install rhythms of planning. So how to like kind of mark out your year so you have the right meetings in place to kind of manage this sort of way of leading. And so it is like um it's a part of an operating system that you're kind of aligning to.
Right.
Yeah. Other thoughts or questions?
I think the importance too that you don't have to necessarily meet the goal because sometimes it's worth it to have a goal that will be a stretch,
Yeah.
knowing you might not make it, but to get people to even think they could.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and for us, it's sometimes we find like I'll say this was a long range goal for us, like a 10, like in our beyond the horizon, we had a goal of a certain number of missional communities launched. And we got about halfway through that 10 years or 6 or 7 years in and realized, oh, the way that we're launching community is not going to be that rigid or that replicable. Like it's more organic. And so we had to back off of the goal and re-emphasize the underlying focus in order to really go the way that God was leading us to go. Cool. That was it. Great. Um, so as I said, I'll do another one of these next month where we're going to talk about integrating to rhythms of planning. And so really it is like and when I like kind of every 90 to 120 days doing a check-in, every year doing a reset, every 3 years doing a deep dive. We'll talk more about that next month. Um, but if you think about the fact that your team, your departmental team, or your organizational team is already meeting probably monthly or quarterly, staff even weekly, what we're talking about is not creating a bunch of new meetings, but what's the content of the meetings we already have that allows us to lead in this way and keep people aligned all along. And so we'll talk about that next month. Um, any other questions at all or reflections, insights? Great.